Oh, look! A penny!
The year is 2005. Vampires are about to be ruined forever. Some guy really wants the world to know about his zoo trip, and Walt Disney Feature Animation is finding itself in a bit of a pickle. After the studio's dizzying success of the 1990s and the well-documented Disney Renaissance period, the studio hit a major creative and financial slump in the early to mid-2000s. This infamous period of the studio's history was marred with critical failures, commercial failures, a mix of both, some decent films with poor returns, some poor films which barely made a profit, and one really good film which was sabotaged from within, making it one of the biggest box office flops in the studio's whole entire history. However, despite this string of failures, the Disney machine was only a few short years away from churning out something truly inspired. A masterpiece which utilised new and exciting technology known as computer-generated imagery, which would transport audiences into an entirely new dimension of Disney magic, and a film which would become a new standard of quality storytelling which would herald in a new renaissance of inspired Tangled. The movie was Tangled. I feel like from 2005 to 2010, Disney were more or less releasing tech demos as practice for their first big release, their true start to releasing CG films. Now, that's not knocking all of these movies. Some of them were actually really good movies story-wise, and they all did relatively fine in the box office. But in 2005, CGI wasn't really new to the film industry. Pixar had been doing it since 1999, and even DreamWorks had beaten Disney to it. Yeah, just a side note here, I know that Toy Story came out in 1995 and not 1999, like I said. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking, that's the answer to that. Big mistake, I'm a big old dummy, and that will never happen again. Disney had a lot of catching up to do in the technology department, and this is definitely clear when comparing them to their competitors. I mean, Meet the Robinsons came out the same year as Shrek the Third and Ratatouille, and Bolt came out the same year as WALL-E. Until Tangled was released, Disney was almost like the Nintendo of the CG animation industry. They did release more good movies than bad movies during this time, but technically, they were nowhere close to reaching the visual flair of their competitors. Now, when experimenting with any new medium, there are bound to be some complications. Technical issues, making the jump from paper to computer, struggling to maintain your identity in this new landscape, all that stuff, entirely understandable. But guys, keeping in mind their early 2000s losing streak, and keeping in mind the entirely new medium, no one could have predicted what Walt Disney Feature Animation would end up releasing in the year 2005.
Chicken said it first, fuck, 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 ah, fuck, 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 ah. Now this is chicken talk, fuck, 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 ah.
Let me take you on a little trip back to the year 2006. Chicken Little's been out for about 6 months now, and 6-year-old me has become what you might call a big fan. I have very vivid memories of going on holiday to Portugal that year, where I spent most of the time playing the Chicken Little game on my Game Boy Advance. I would quote iconic lines from the movie such as, "Pump it up, pump it, pump it, pump it," and "What were we talking about?" The Portuguese kids club leader would print off pictures of the titular Chicken Little for me to colour in because he understood and appreciated the depth of my love for this film. Now, with all this in mind, and after rewatching the film 16 years later, it brings me no great joy to tell you that Chicken Little is actually not very good, and may well be one of the saddest experiences I've ever had watching a Disney animation. It's so overwhelmingly mean-spirited, and not in a deadpan, edgy humour way. Everyone is awful in this movie, and most of the time I'm not even sure if it was played for laughs, or if this is just the depressing reality of the world that Chicken Little lives in. I know a lot of analysis videos exist about this father figure who only likes his son when other people like his son, so I won't dwell on him too long. It's not just book cluck though. Every single adult in this film is just so mean.
Up next, Chicken Little.
Hit the pig, kids!
Yeah, game of hide and seek, except the gold is never to be found.
Ever.
None of this is funny. I don't know what they were thinking. Humour in general is something that the film has a really hard time with. Actually, no, that isn't fair. I did actually laugh once during the film, in fairness.
You have to, what did he say? You have to, don't.
That's it. That's the funniest sequence in Chicken Little. For 2004, the animation is so below the bar considering that all of these films came out beforehand, but that's really a non-issue in the grand scheme of things that went wrong with Chicken Little. It was their first attempt at CG animation, so... What is a major issue though is the pacing. This movie feels like two very different, very distinct films. One is a coming-of-age primary school baseball film, and the second is a sci-fi alien invasion disaster movie, each with its own 3-act structure, which makes for essentially a 6-act film. These two films have a very weak link with the parental reconciliation plotline, but the transition from one to the other is just jarring and does not mesh well together whatsoever. One thing they do have in common though is this obnoxious breakneck pacing. Excluding the credits, Chicken Little clocks in at just over 70 minutes. This is not a long movie. So why are we spending entire minutes on sequences like this one which have no relevance to the plot at all? Scenes like this never come up again in any way, shape or form. I'd get it if maybe in the climax the fish had to King Kong himself somewhere to save someone or do anything. Foreshadowing, build up, love it, got it, amazing. But there's just no point to it. It's just another god-awful pop culture reference to add to this film's pantheon of god-awful pop culture references. That's actually another thing.
Ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low.
I do not want another single pop culture reference out of you for the rest of the trip, you understand?
This movie really looked at the success of Shrek and said, I'm going to be just like them, but better. Oh, replied the studio with a nervous glance, through a wholesome story and great animation and actual effort put in. Wait, what? Puzzled the movie, watching Fiona through starry eyes as she matrixes herself through Robin Hood's merry men. The number of pop culture references this film manages to squeeze into its tiny runtime is honestly absurd. I skimmed through the film to see how many references I could spot just by skipping through every 10 seconds and timing how long each reference lasted. Just by doing that, I calculated that approximately 6% of the film's primary screen time was devoted to pop culture references that don't forward the plot. Guys, if your film is barely pushing 70 minutes, you can't afford to spend 6% of that time on referencing pop culture. You have to make every second count.
I'm a woman's man.
Don't make Mommy take away your Streisand collection!
'Cause I am the champion! I will survive! Hey, ha! Baby, now it's too late. No, they really didn't try to make it.
It's just so hard watching them try to pull off a Shrek without understanding the fundamentals of what made Shrek's references so great as an antithesis to Disney. You have to wonder what sort of production drama or studio interference occurred behind the scenes of Chicken Little to end up with a mess like this.
Maybe he's a half-living host implanted with their face-hugging embryo babies.
Like a lot of modern day blockbusters, the production of Chicken Little was genuinely plagued with studio interference and creative clashes between director Mark Dindal and then Disney CEO Michael Eisner. The original plot for Chicken Little was actually much humbler in scope and somewhat resembled the original Henny Penny folktale that the final product is supposedly based on. It involved a female Chicken Little with an overactive imagination who has a strained relationship with her father after causing havoc in the town for mistaking an acorn for a piece of the sky. Sound familiar? Wanting to improve her relationship with her father, she signs up for summer camp to improve her self-confidence where, once there, she uncovers that a group of wolves have kidnapped the counsellors and, disguised as sheep,
That's pretty good.
planned on fattening up the kids and preparing them for a wolf feast at the end of camp. A simple premise which seems to really double down on the parental reconciliation theme, which the final product essentially just pays lip service to.
You're never there for me.
What? I get.
Apparently this version of the film had been in development for years and was almost entirely storyboarded too with a complete script. A few scenes of this version of the film can actually be found online, fully voiced and everything. I'll link those in the description of this video if you're interested, and I would recommend it because it's honestly so interesting to imagine just how drastically different the original product was shaping up to be before the project was pitched to Eisner, that is. Eisner was unimpressed with the ambition of the project both creatively and with how he thought it would perform in the box office. According to him, films with female protagonists underperform because, quote, girls will go see a movie with a boy protagonist, but boys won't see a movie with a girl protagonist, end quote. Eisner's decision was final and Chicken Little became a boy. Shortly after then followed an entire restructuring of the screenplay. The camp storyline was replaced with a half-baked baseball championship, The wolf antagonists became alien invaders, and the entire second half of the movie transitioned just into bad sci-fi. The bare bones elements are still there, sure, but the presentation is hardly recognisable. For years afterwards, the Hollywood machine tugged along with Chicken Little acting as a solemn beacon on how to not interfere with the script, and boom, Gatubbin, it's 2013, and Will Smith has an idea for a film about parental reconciliation, where a father and a son get into a car accident. The son has to travel cross country to get to a radio tower to get help, bonding with his father through a walkie-talkie on the way. Bam! Fine movie. Gave it a November release date, it gets nominated for all the Oscars, and it wins no Oscars. The year is 2013 and Will Smith just made a perfect indie film. There was only one problem, and that Will Smith proposed this script to the worst possible guy,
M. Night Shyamalan,
who at the time had directed one masterpiece, with every subsequent film getting less and less good until we thought he'd hit rock bottom. Well, weren't we fools? Because it just so happened that when Will Smith proposed this script to him, Chicken Little was on the TV. Shyamalan took one look at the words fade in, pointed at the TV and said, "I want to make a movie just like that." What? Puzzled Smith as he watched Shyamalan gaze lovingly at the TV, watching Chicken Little fumble over the basic fundamentals of storytelling. And thus, After Earth was conceived. More or less. A once simple concept about parental reconciliation through a child becoming more self-confident and a parent becoming more understanding that somehow became a bad science fiction film through fears of the film not being marketable enough.
Get me a new screenplay.
Clearly, studio executives forgot their mistakes of 8 years prior, and as history has taught us time and time again, those who don't learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. Which leads us quite nicely into... On September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, thereby starting the Second World War, which over the course of 6 years and 1 day would become the deadliest conflict in human history, and which left the European continent devastated for years to come. But honestly, the war in Europe isn't really relevant to this video, no. Today I want to focus on the war in the United States, specifically the role that the American media played in the war.
I'm gonna kill you.
During wartime, it's important for belligerents to keep the public morale of their citizens high, and arguably no strategy is more effective than this than good old propaganda. Radio stations and cinemas would play newsreels heavily informing citizens of any good news abroad, posters and advertisements would inform people on how they could assist in the war effort, and film studios would often produce movies portraying the good guys triumphing over adversity. Very standard propaganda stuff, I would say. Among the many companies producing propaganda films for the war effort, Walt Disney Studios. On the verge of complete bankruptcy in the early 1940s, Disney was approached by the US government to produce animated propaganda short films which supported the war effort. In return, they would be compensated about $90,000, the equivalent of just over $2.5 million in 2022, which may well have been what saved them from complete bankruptcy in the years following the war. Between the year 1941 and 1945, Walt Disney Studios dedicated 90% of its total output to training, propaganda and public service films, producing dozens of short films related to the war. When all was said and done, hundreds of thousands of feet of film had been produced, Walt Disney Studios had been saved from bankruptcy, and the world was left with an invaluable time capsule of American wartime propaganda. If nothing else, a glimpse into trips to the cinema over 75 years ago through the dozens of short propaganda films which preceded their main features from 41 to 45. Now, one of those short films... Chicken Little is a 1943 wartime propaganda short film which aims to caution its audience about the dangers of mass hysteria and fake news. It would act as the very loose inspiration for the original plot of the 2005 film and as an even looser inspiration for the actual final product. The film follows the residents of a chicken coop with a strict social hierarchy in place. The flock's leader, Cocky Locky, keeps the peace within the community and is admired by all members of the flock, from Henny Penny's gossiping clique to Goosey Poosey and Ducky Lucky's watering hole, to the lowest members of the community, including titular Chicken Little, portrayed here as a meek and unconfident simpleton. Unlike the 2005 film, Chicken Little's father is absent here and therefore not the antagonist of the short film. Instead, a male Foxy Loxy takes the role of antagonist here, wanting to kill and eat the chickens, as foxes tend to want to do, but naturally has to be sly about it. Therefore, using his extensive knowledge of psychology, Foxy Loxy succeeds in convincing Chicken Little that a piece of the sky has fallen.
This is the voice of doom speaking. Special bulletin. Flash. The sky is falling. A piece of it just hit you on the head.
However, before mass panic can take hold, glorious leader Cocky Locky steps out and puts everyone at ease. It's not a piece of the sky, it's clearly a piece of wood painted blue. You stupid idiot, Chicken Little, you embarrassing, stupid piece of... Not to be dissuaded, Foxy Loxy returns to his psychology and realises that Cocky Locky is the real issue. As long as the chickens have a strong and glorious leader to protect them, they'll remain safe from his grasp. So, Foxy does what any opposition would do and begins a smear campaign against Cocky Locky, convincing all tiers of the group that he's not fit for leadership. Why should Cocky tell us what to think? We should decide for ourselves if the sky is falling. If he's wrong, we're all in danger. He's been knocking back that fermented grain, if you catch my drift, see?
Why do you do the accent?
I do not know.
Rumours spread, as rumours do, until they finally reach Cocky Locky himself. However, before he can restore order to the coop, Foxy Loxy, acting as Chicken Little's confidence, convinces him to proclaim himself the new leader of the coop. When this is challenged by Cocky Locky, he is hit on the head by a star-shaped piece of wood, but by this point, the crowd is too hysterical to listen to reason. They all look to Chicken Little for guidance, and Foxy, speaking through Chicken Little, convinces them to flee to the cave where they'll obviously be safe from the falling sky.
Not a great plan.
Because they're most certainly not safe in the cave and they all actually die, and the movie ends right there, to a kind of misplaced triumphant score.
Don't believe everything you read, brother.
Throughout the duration of the short film, Foxy Loxy quotes 4 passages from his psychology book which ultimately shape his scheme. Although the film never explicitly states which group of people or ideology it's opposing, the context in which the film was made makes it pretty clear that this was originally an anti-Nazi propaganda film, making sure that the American people didn't lose faith in their leaders regardless of what they may hear or be told. This is also substantiated by stories that originally Foxy Loxy was to be reading from a certain German dictator's autobiography rather than a generic psychology book. However, this was changed to keep the film timeless and to avoid being dated after the war, and in that, the film kind of succeeds. When looked at objectively, the film's morals of don't believe everything you hear, don't listen to fake news, and don't blindly follow the crowd are messages that are relevant and have remained relevant throughout the near century since the film's release. Heck, even in the past 10 years, these morals have seemed more relevant than ever. So yeah, it's impressive to me that a short animation that was created on a tight schedule, tight budget, and with the distinct purpose of being wartime propaganda, manages to remain relevant today. I've mentioned before in the past, it all comes down to simplicity. A simple message is always more profound than a convoluted one, no matter how many special effects, subplots, or Hollywood stars you surround it with. Chicken Little is a good short film that, while not the most profound piece of art ever created, will probably always remain somewhat relevant exactly because of its simple message. With regards to the 2005 film, I don't actually know what the moral of that film is. It's definitely not the same as the short film, because in the new one the sky actually was falling, and in the new one Chicken Little was actually right in the end. The only main theme I could find in both halves of this movie was the obvious beat over the head message of how every day is a fresh start or a new day.
That's it. Today is a new day. New day. New day!
Which is something Disney would do better only 2 years later in Meet the Robinsons. Like, Disney following his own morals, I can kind of buy that, I guess. But it's incorporated into the story so clumsily and so sparsely that I don't even know if that's what Disney intended the moral of this movie to be. There are a lot of things, actually, that I don't know about this movie. I don't know why the back of the DVD cover says this is Disney's 45th animated feature, when Wikipedia tells me it's the 46th. I don't know why Porcupine Morcupine was so heavily advertised when he has just 3 lines, no, actually words, throughout the entire film.
Yo, no, whoa.
I don't know what the animation is trying to tell me in this shot, and I don't know why the fandom article history for Chicken Little is so cursed. However, there is one thing I do know, and that's that both times an iteration of this character appeared under the Disney umbrella, Disney was in complete dire straits, yet within a few years of both of these films' releases, the studio would witness a major resurgence in popularity and success, ultimately saving the company both times. I mean, isn't it funny that regardless of quality, Chicken Little was kind of involved in a major transition success period for Disney twice? Well, in this gene's opinion, that's probably just a coincidence. People started seeing more movies because the economy improved after the war, and Disney hired 2 guys from Pixar to save the feature animation department in the mid-2000s.
But hey, that's just a theory. A gene theory. Thanks for watching.